8 months along, I sat in a straight-backed chair by the window, and I was not allowed to leave it before he came home. My ankles had gone thick as bread loaves. The August heat pressed on the glass. There were 8 rules by then, one for every month I'd carried our child, and my husband had given each of them to me, the way you'd hand someone a warm quilt. Careful, tender, like love. The first 7 I could almost explain away. I did explain them away, for years. But the 8th was the one I still can't fold up small enough to forget. My name is Rebecca, and I grew up and married inside an Amish home, where a good wife was a quiet one. I'm telling you this the way I'd tell a woman sitting across my kitchen table at night. Plainly, with the kettle going cold between us. If you've ever had a piece of your own life handed back to you with rules attached, I think you'll understand this story in your bones. So stay with me. Subscribe if you want to sit at this table again, because I have more of these to tell, and they're easier to carry when someone's listening. And before I go on, let me ask you this. What's a rule someone once gave you that you mistook for love? Tell me in the comments. Now, let me start at the beginning. It started in the first month, before I even had a shape to show for it. I told Amos I was expecting on a Sunday evening, and he set down his coffee, took both my hands, and said the wagon rides were finished. The road out to the county store was too rough now, and he'd not risk it. I remember the lamp guttering, and the smell of the beans still on the stove. I was 23, and frightened and grateful all at once. It felt like being wrapped in something, a man who cared where my body went. That was the first rule, and I thanked him for it. The second month, the rule was about lifting. Nothing heavier than a half-full pail, he said, and he moved the water bucket to the porch so I wouldn't be tempted. His mother nodded at that one. The aunts nodded. Everyone agreed a woman carrying should be spared, and they were not wrong. Exactly. That's the part I need you to sit with. A pregnant woman shouldn't haul a full pail up icy steps. But somewhere inside the sense of it, a second thing was growing quietly alongside the baby. The habit of him deciding, the habit of me not. By the 3rd month, I'd stopped noticing they were rules at all. That's the thing no one warns you about. They don't arrive looking like walls. They arrive looking like a hand on the small of your back, steering you gentle around a puddle you hadn't seen. The 3rd rule was that I'd stop going to the Tuesday quilting circle. The walk was long, he said, and the Yoder farm had that mean dog, so I stayed home on Tuesdays. I told myself I'd go back after the baby came. I told myself a great many things that year, and most of them started with after. Let me tell you about the chair, because it matters later. It was a plain oak chair with a woven seat, set by the front window where the light came in mornings. Amos's grandfather had made it. When we married, Amos put it there and said it was mine, and I loved it the way you love the first thing in a house that belongs only to you. In those early months it was a comfort. I'd sit and shell peas and watch the road. I did not yet know that a chair a man gives you can also become a chair a man expects to find you in. The 4th rule I can barely say without laughing, and it isn't a good laugh. He asked me to stop singing the English hymns I'd learned from a cousin. Only the old German ones now, only the ones the church knew. For the baby's sake, he said. So the child would be born into the right sounds. I want you to hear how that could seem beautiful. A father shaping a world of holy music for his unborn child. That's how I heard it. I hummed the German ones over the dishpan, and felt righteous doing it, and the English tunes went quiet in me one by one. Here is what I understand now, that I could not understand then. Not one of those first rules was the problem. Any single one of them, you could defend at a supper table and win. The problem was never the rule. It was the arithmetic. It was that each one made the next one smaller. Once he decided where I walked, deciding what I sang was only a little more. Once I'd said thank you for the wagon, saying thank you for the chair was easy. I was teaching myself, month by month, that his hand on my life was the same thing as his love, and nobody around me thought to say otherwise. Because in the world I lived in, That was simply what a husband's care looked like. I didn't have the words for any of this back then. I want to be honest about that. I was not a woman quietly seething behind a calm face, plotting. I was a young wife who believed she was blessed. I made his shirts and I carried his child, and I sat in my grandfather-in-law's chair by the window feeling, most days, that God had given me a gentle man. If you'd asked me in that 4th month whether I was happy, I'd have said yes, and meant it. That's the cruelest part of the whole thing, and I need you to hold on to it, because it makes the rest make sense. But something did shift, and I can put my finger on the month it started. It was the 5th, when the rules stopped being about the road and the pail and the songs, the things outside me, and turned toward the things inside my own house. Toward who I could talk to, toward what I was allowed to say when I did. The first 4 had wrapped around me like that quilt. The 5th was the first one I felt as a thread pulled tight. I didn't call it that then, but I remember the afternoon it happened, and I remember exactly who was standing at my door. The woman at my door was Sarah Byler, a widow from the far end of our district, and she'd walked the whole way to bring me a jar of elderberry syrup for the cough that was going around. I remember the jar, dark glass, a scrap of cloth tied over the lid with kitchen string. She stood on my porch, and we talked maybe 10 minutes about nothing. About the heat, about her late husband's apple trees. When Amos came in from the field and saw her leaving, he didn't say a word until the buggy was gone. Then he told me, kindly, that Sarah talked too much, and it wasn't good for me. That was the 5th rule. I set that jar of syrup on the shelf and I looked at it for a long while. Something in me had gone still. Not angry. I want to be truthful, there was no anger yet. Just still, the way a room goes still when a clock you've heard for years suddenly stops. He hadn't raised his voice. He'd been gentle as ever. And yet the 5th rule was different from the first 4, in a way I couldn't name, because the first 4 had been about my body and my safety, and this one was about my company, who I let in, whose voice I heard besides his. The 6th month, the rule folded inward again. He asked that I not speak of the pregnancy to anyone outside the family. Not the aches, not the fears, not the strange dreams that come when you're carrying. It was a private thing, he said. A holy thing, not for gossip. And here's what I did with that. I agreed, because it sounded like reverence. It sounded like he wanted to keep something sacred between us. Only years later did I understand that a rule against speaking of your suffering is a rule against anyone finding out you're suffering. But that August, I just nodded, and felt married, and kept my dreams to myself. Something you should know about how these rules were kept. It was never only Amos. When I skipped the quilting circle, it was his mother who told the other women I was resting well, saving me the shame of explaining. When I stopped visiting, it was my own aunt, who said a good expecting wife stays close to home. The whole world I lived in leaned the same direction he did, so his hand never looked like a hand. It looked like weather, like the way things simply were. You cannot fight weather. You just dress for it, and wait for the season to turn, and I was waiting for mine, waiting for after. It was around then that Sarah Byler said the thing I couldn't shake. She'd caught me alone at a funeral, of all places. Both of us washing dishes in a back kitchen where the men couldn't hear. She dried a plate slow and she said, not looking at me, "The 8th month is the hard one, child. That's when they stop asking." Then someone came in and she went quiet, and I never got to ask what she meant. They stop asking. I turned it over for weeks. I thought she meant the baby, the discomfort, the sleeplessness. I was wrong about what she meant, but I wouldn't learn how wrong until it was my own 8th month. The 7th rule cost me something I can still feel the shape of. My younger sister, Mary, was to be married that fall, 3 districts over, and I had been the one to help her sew since she was small. I'd promised her I'd be there. Amos said no. The travel was too much this late, he said. The roads, the strain. Think of the child. And I understood the sense of it. I did. But I also stood in my kitchen and cried into a dish towel where he couldn't see, because I knew Mary would stand up in her blue dress and look for me, and I would not be there. That was the first rule that took something from me I couldn't get back. A wedding happens once. I missed my sisters. And do you know what I did after I cried? I dried my face, and I sat down in the oak chair by the window, and I told myself he was right. That's the part I need you to really hear, because it's the part I've had to forgive myself for. I was not a prisoner rattling a locked door. I was the one who kept turning the key from the inside, telling myself it was love, telling myself after. The chair by the window had become the shape of my whole world by then. The road I watched but didn't walk. The visitors I saw come and go but didn't keep. I sat in it more and more. I told myself I was resting. Then came the 8th month, and the heat, and the swelling, and Sarah's words waiting for me like a stone in a field I finally had to plow. That's when they stopped asking. For 7 months, every rule had come to me the same way. His hands taking mine, his voice low and careful, a reason given, my thank you offered up in return. Careful, tender, like a gift I was meant to unwrap and be grateful for. I had gotten so used to the wrapping that I'd forgotten to look at what was inside any of them. The 8th rule was the first one he didn't wrap at all. And that, I think, is the day I finally saw. By the 8th month, my body was not my own in any way I'd known before. I couldn't tie my own shoes. Getting up from the oak chair took 2 tries and a hand on the sill. I slept sitting half upright because lying flat stole my breath. This is the part every mother listening knows in her body already. That late pregnancy helplessness. When you are more animal than person. When you would give anything for someone to be gentle with you. That is the exact moment Amos chose to give me the 8th rule. And for the first time in 8 months, he didn't take my hands. He didn't lower his voice. He just told me, the way you'd tell a child the stove is hot. The rule was this. I was not to go to the birth alone with the midwife, as every woman in our district did. He would be in the room. He would decide, when the time came, what was done and what was not. Which of the midwife's judgments were followed, and which were overruled. My mother, who had caught a dozen babies in that district, was not to be sent for. He had prayed on it, he said, and decided that a husband should have the final say over his wife and his child, even there, even on that table, even at that hour. I need to be careful how I say this next part, because it is the whole heart of it, and I don't want to dress it up. It was not that he wanted to be present. Plenty of gentle men want to be near. It was that he was taking the one room, the 1 hour, that had always belonged to women, to my mother, to the midwife, to my own body doing the oldest work there is, and he was placing his say above the say of the woman, whose hands actually knew what to do. At the moment I would be least able to speak for myself, he had arranged to speak for me. That's when they stopped asking. Sarah hadn't meant the baby. She'd meant this exact thing. And I saw his face. I want to tell you about his face, because that was the moment the last of the wrapping fell away. He was not cruel. He was not angry. He looked peaceful, certain, like a man doing a right and holy thing. A man who loved me so completely that he could not bear to leave even my labor to my own body. And that peace on his face frightened me more than shouting ever could have. Because I understood, standing there with my swollen hands on the windowsill, that he truly believed the rules had all been love. Every one of them. He wasn't lying to me. He'd been telling himself the same story I had. Here is a word I did not have then, and have now. Control. Not the cruel kind with a raised hand. The tender kind. The kind that arrives as care, and settles in as ownership. One reasonable rule at a time, until a grown woman needs permission to sit, to sing, to speak, to give birth. There's a plain name for a love that must decide everything for you, and the name is not love. I couldn't have said that at 23, shelling peas and feeling blessed. But at 8 months, in that heat, looking at his peaceful, certain face, something in me said it without any words at all. Number. It was small, that no. It didn't come out of my mouth. I stood there and I nodded. Because nodding was 8 months of habit, and my body did it before my mind could stop it. But underneath the nod, deep, where no rule had ever reached, a single word had planted itself and gone still and hard as a seed in winter ground. No, not tonight, not out loud, not yet, but it was there. And once a woman has felt that word arrive in her, truly arrive, she cannot unfeel it. She can pretend, she can nod for months more. I did, but she knows. I sat back down in the oak chair after he'd gone out to the barn. The light was going gold the way it does in late August, laying itself across the floorboards. And I looked at that chair, his grandfather's chair, the first thing in the house that had ever been mine, and I understood what it had been all along. A gift, yes, and a place he always knew where to find me, both things at once. That was the whole marriage in one piece of oak. He had never once locked a door on me. He had simply given me such a comfortable chair, in such a good light, with so many gentle reasons to stay in it, that I had locked myself. I did not run that night. I want to be honest to the end. There was a baby coming, and a winter, and a whole world of aunts and mothers and church that leaned his way like weather. It would be a long time before I walked out of that light. But the 8th month was the one that woke me. Not because it was the loudest rule, but because it was the first one he forgot to call a gift. And once I'd seen a single rule with its wrapping off, I couldn't stop seeing the other 7. If you've ever sat in your own comfortable chair, in your own good light, and felt that quiet no arrive, you already know the rest of my story better than I could tell it. That word is yours to keep. Nobody gets to give it to you. And nobody, no matter how gently, gets to take it away.